welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I get to meet people with fascinating stories. How I wish I were around 100 years ago to have done this interview. These folks look like they just, they came to the Rogue Valley, but let's find out more about them. Welcome to the show.
Thank
you
you.
Are?
My name is Jan Wright.
Jan, welcome. How do you connect with these folk?
Well, I think I have a spiritual connection with them, actually, because I've never met them in person. But this man here, Wellborn Beeson, left behind an account of his life that is very remarkable. He started at the age 15 when he was living in Illinois, and for the rest of his life, he kept a daily journal.
This is Mr. and Mrs. Beeson. What's
Right.
her name?
Her name was Mary Catherine Brophy. They called her Kate. And
Kate Beeson came to the Rogue Valley?
she came in 1865.
Oh, pioneer days.
Yes.
And he
came in 1853.
Oh,
So
really?
He was on a very early wagon train and arrived through the Applegate Trail
We did.
in the southern route with many other settlers who came that same year.
Well, have you traveled some of the Applegate Trail to the way they came from Klamath? That must have been terribly arduous.
They did have an arduous journey, and there is the portion of his diary that he wrote from 1851 to 53 talks all about that, not only the journey itself, but the preparations. They took 2 years to prepare to come to Oregon. It was a very, this was not a journey that poor people took. It was a journey for middle and upper classes. They had to spend at least $2,000 to prepare.
$2,000 in their dollars?
In their dollars.
What would that be for us? 200,000 maybe?
I don't know what it would be for us today, but it would be considerably more.
So who got the money?
They would save as much as they could so that they would have money when they got to Oregon to buy supplies and goods. But it went to the wagon makers and to the people with the oxen and with about a year's supply of food that they had to bring along with them.
Do you know what they brought?
Well, yes, they brought bacon, beans, flour, hardtack.
I'd probably have to bring candles and.
They brought candles. They brought clothing sufficient for their needs across the plains, and also, when they arrived, they wanted to have something that didn't have holes in it. So they always tried to set aside a dress or something that they could wear when they got there to not look like ragged people when they got to their destination.
This is in the book, in the autograph.
Much of the
Diary?
preparation, he even gives the detail of having to kill his pets before he left because he was afraid that his cat and his dog were going to follow him, and he didn't want them to suffer through their leaving, so he had to go out and shoot them. And he talks about that in the journal. He's a very young boy when he starts the journal. He had participated in the Underground Railroad while he was out in Illinois.
You mean the Underground Railroad's not a railroad at all?
Right. It was to assure that the slaves from the South got to the North and to freedom. And his father, who is pictured right here, was John Beeson. He was an early abolitionist, and then when he arrived in Oregon, he became immediately sympathetic with the Native Americans.
Fascinating.
Yes.
And they were here when this was turbulent times.
The day they arrived, there was fighting between the natives and the whites. one man, Albert Rockfellow, was injured during, or Asa Fordyce was injured during a battle the day he arrived in Oregon.
You mean right here in Southern Oregon?
That's right. There was a fort called Fort Wagner, which is located in what is now called the City of Talent. And all the wagons, everybody from the immigrant train, circled around that fort or lived inside the fort for a few days, a few weeks before.
After this battle?
Right.
Oh.
Because they were afraid of the Indians that were retaliating against some of the things that the whites had done.
Well, I know Josephine, for which our county is named, her family left. Her dad, they left from here because it wasn't as safe.
Right.
And now this young couple, when did they meet? Or you know
well,
that?
They didn't meet until after the Indian Wars and after the Civil War.
Oh.
But because Wellborn was just a young man when he arrived, he wasn't ready to get married. He didn't have any means or income or way to support a wife. So in those days, they didn't get married until they could. They didn't just say, oh, forget it, we'll get married anyway.
Live on love.
And
they knew it took a lot of chopping of wood and a lot of...
Absolutely. And his wife was quite young when he married him, but he was 30 years of age when he got married. So.
Okay, so they're 30 and...
She's about probably
teenager?
17 or something like that, yeah.
Oh, what a beautiful...
They got married in Jacksonville and by a Catholic priest. She was a Catholic and he was not. And that was a struggle for him. He writes about that in his diary too, about how he wasn't so sure about her religion and what that meant to her, and if they could raise their children in the Catholic faith or not. And it's very highly unusual for diarists of that during that time period to comment so in such detail about their marriages, births, deaths.
Well, you're talking about inflections and really personal feelings, which we don't
Absolutely.
usually think men are going to write that sort of thing down.
That's true, and that's why I think
They
that
keep a
Wellborn
secret.
Beeson's diary is so remarkable. That is the reason why Talent Historical Society has taken on a project to microfilm and transcribe the entire diaries.
Of how many years?
Of 42 years.
Oh, fantastic.
They are currently housed at the University of Oregon Special Collections, and the family donated those years ago, and they've been rather inaccessible. Parts of the diary, such as the Oregon Trail portion, have been published and are on, some of them you can actually check out from the local libraries.
Oh, well, here it is. Wellborn Beeson in 1853. Now, where could I get this book?
Well, you can order it from Talent Historical Society. Bert Weber publishes it, and he has a publishing house. It's called the Webb Research Group, and you can order it through them as well.
And this looks like just a great deal. So we can learn more about the Applegate Trail by reading
Absolutely.
Mr. Beeson's work.
Absolutely. You can learn about the Jenny Creek Slide and King Creek and all of those places that are unique to Southern Oregon.
Because we've done about the meadow up on top as they came from Klamath, which was such a difficult climb. They could stay on top, and I got to go up there where the at Boxar Ranch, where you can actually see the trail.
2 years ago, the Beeson family had a reunion at the Boxar Ranch.
Oh!
To commemorate the 100th anniversary of Wellborn and his family, and his father and mother coming into the valley.
The trek.
Yes.
Arduous trek.
And it
He
was
was
on the
how
very
old?
site. He was, I believe he was 15, maybe 17 when he came across.
And this is who?
This is him on the right, I guess you would say. He
and his buddies are
Right.
dressed up for what?
Well, during the Civil War, a lot of people think Oregon had very little to do with the Civil War, and though we didn't have battlefields and great fighting in the area, people here were very involved and passionate about either the Union or the Confederate side.
And it was.
And it was both ways. And
On one pole or the other.
very much so. Politics and all those sorts of things were very hot topics of the day. Wellborn joined an Oregon militia group. It was not a national like the U.S. Army, but it was an Oregon militia group called the Mountain Rangers. And this is Abel Hellman, and this is Ivan Applegate, and this is Wellborn Beeson. They were the officers of the Mountain Rangers, and this is a picture of him during that time period in the 1860s, during the Civil War time period. They didn't actually fight, but they were involved in road building, and they did a lot of drilling. They marched up and down the streets of Ashland and Talent and the Rogue Valley, and there was
We are here to protect you.
right, and they also, if the Native Americans, there was some belief that the natives would kind of use the Civil War as an opportunity to cause some problems, and so they were there to make sure that the Indians didn't get out of hand, which I could imagine Wellborn had mixed feelings about. Since his father was back east, he's having an audience with President Lincoln and with other statesmen. He knew Ulysses S. Grant. He knew the federal Indian agents. He knew all those people.
Because he was in support
right.
of First Nation people here.
Absolutely.
And my goodness. Well, Oregon was merely a territory, right? We're talking about...
not at this time. It became a state in 1859.
Oh, I remember waving in 1959. We celebrated. Oh, what a treat. Now, there's other books. Storyteller.
Thomas Doty is a very widely known storyteller. He does have Native American heritage as well as Irish heritage. And he wrote this book based on the writings of John Beeson, Wellborn Beeson's father.
Plea for the Indians.
John wrote a plea for the Indians in 1857, pleading with people to recognize Indians as persons, which seems kind of unbelievable today because we know they are people. But he wanted them to be treated like people and for us to act like Christians and include them in our brotherhood and sisterhood. And he was very, he sacrificed his own life for the cause of trying to improve the lives of the Native Americans. He didn't live with his family for years and years and years. Lived back east and did lectures, never got paid, lived with people, philanthropists and people who would take him in, but just...
Well, now, you started this program by telling us that he was an abolitionist.
He was an abolitionist, and that just kind of...
Isn't this fantastic? Because people's rights.
Absolutely.
He was supporting the levels all even, the ground's even at the foot of the cross. I love to hear that.
He He has been called the first civil rights or human rights activist in Oregon. He was not very popular in Oregon. He was not very highly regarded by some of the politicians and such.
Because they were on either pole.
Right, and because during the Indian Wars, it was a great opportunity for miners and other people who were otherwise not employed during certain periods of the year to kind of create employment for themselves by volunteering for the Army, which meant that they were causing trouble for the Indians when they didn't have work to do, when they had no other work to do. And they asked the government in return to compensate them for that, for being in the Army, and if they lost a mule or a house or a piece of land or something like that, they would ask the government to compensate them. And sometimes, in some cases, they would ask for compensation way beyond the true value of the thing that was lost.
You mean there were crooks back then, too?
So John Beeson, that was one of his strong points, was that he delayed greatly the reparations for the war. He did not allow people to rip the government off.
That's what we call it today, right?
That's why he wasn't liked. That's one of the main reasons why he was not welcome in Oregon for so many years.
Well, when did the tides turn? When did he build a home? When did he call this gorgeous, gorgeous, and this still exists?
This home is on Wagner Creek Road in Talent, Oregon, just outside of Talent.
Publicly owned or privately?
It's privately owned. It was, this is actually taken after the house was remodeled considerably, because Wellborn was, he was an unusual man. He built an octagonal home in 1863.
8 sides on a house.
And you can barely see it in the back here, and then on the other side you can see part of it's left. When he sold the home in the 1890s, the first thing the person who bought the home did was remodel it. He didn't like living in a round house, so to speak. So the home, you can still tell from the back of the house that it was octagonal, which is another reason why I think that Wellborn Beeson is such an important part of Oregon history, not just, you know, local talent history, but really statewide. His home is now on the National Historic Register of Historic Places.
That means it's open to the public one day a year.
And it also, well, it mostly means that the person who owns it cannot change the exterior of it without great, you know, regulations. And they also get a tax break on it for 15 years, which
but
they don't have to pay.
I'm mostly interested in the day that it's open. I'd love to find out about that tour.
I myself have never been inside. It's they call it it's had various names since he sold it, but at one time it was called Meadowbrook Farm, and it's kind of a commercial place now where they sell nuts and fruit and things like that.
Well, I do know because I was in a group of us ladies went to G Street in Grants Pass years ago because we'd read in the newspaper that this particular building was going to be open for its historic value. Well, 6 or 8 older women walking into the bar left quite a shock. What are you doing here? I think they were looking for carnations in her hatchet or something. But it was fascinating because we learned a lot. Now the building is a fine shop. And along G Street, all those, or Front Street as it used to be called, are now fine places. But your town, Talent, Phoenix, Ashland, and Jacksonville are contemporaries, aren't they?
Yes, Jacksonville was really first because of the gold rush, mainly focused around that area in Jacksonville.
And Medford came way late.
Medford was after the railroad was established in the 1880s. So Medford was just chaparral city, they called it. It had nothing but rabbits and chaparral out there.
And out on the east side, that was agate. Until Camp White came along and said, now, this, you mentioned his family. We need to get back to husband and wife here.
Okay.
So this was when he was still young, before he got married.
Right, this is before he's married. And then this is just a few days after they were married, and that's also in the diary. The exact day that they go to the photographer. Peter Britt was the photographer.
Oh, he was. Oh, don't you wish it were signed and all?
He writes about that too in his diary every time he goes to have his picture taken. Of course, it was a major event and didn't happen very often, and they didn't take a wedding picture, so to speak, the day they got married, but they took it about 6 days after they were married.
Please tell me your favorite parts of this diary.
My favorite parts are really this time period when Wellborn is quite young. He's just turning 30. And just before he married Catherine, his mother had died. And the poignancy of the diary at that time really speaks to me. It's he had a very close relationship with his mother, and at times he would write about how frustrating it was to, she had pretty tight apron strings at times, and he didn't like that, and he was his own man. Ever since he was a teenager, he was running the farm himself.
Because Dad was
Dad was back east, and Dad was actually writing him for money at times, asking him to finance part of his lecture tours. So when his mother died is really when he met Catherine Brophy. And
where was she from?
She had been living in California. Her father was had a huge plot of land down there that got flooded out by the Sacramento River. And he had a lot of financial reverses, and he moved up to Wagner Creek, or Talent as it's called now. And so one of the things that he says in the diary when she dies is, "There's no one to love me now." And that just struck a chord with me, and he immediately just turns his face toward the woman who's helping him nurse his mother, and that was his future wife, Catherine Brophy.
Oh, so she was household help.
Yes. In those days, everybody just kind of helped each other, and whoever was available and free at the moment would come in, and they would put wet rags on people's heads and change their bedding and make sure that they were comfortable and that sort of thing. They'd do the best that they could do. And Catherine was one of those that helped him do that, and I think they bonded with each other at that time.
Oh, of course, through tragedy. Now, does she have children? I mean, do they have children?
They have 8 children together.
Oh, no.
And the really sad part about the family is that he died in 1893. He was in his 50s. And then she died the next year, 1894. That left the children to mostly be farmed out, or some of the older children took in the younger children. But I think their youngest was about, 5 or 6 years old.
So a real heartbreak.
Really
to
heartbreak.
Lose both parents.
And it breaks up the family. There's no physical artifacts left from this family. None. Only the diaries. And that's why they're so important, because they tell the story. And that's what you want to know. I mean, a table or a chair is nice, but it doesn't tell you the story like the diaries do.
Right. So probably the furniture, the whole house just when the kids were farmed out.
Oh, and there were so many of them. Each got a little piece of it, and so there's nothing left. And so it's very wonderful that we do have access to the diaries.
And how did you become involved?
Well, even before I was director of Talent Historical Society, I've been driving to Eugene and looking at the diaries and transcribing parts of it and writing down bits of it. And when I got this job, that was one of the first thoughts that I had, would be to repatriate the diaries, to get them back home, to bring them back where they belonged. And we are doing that through a microfilming process. It's not the real diaries, but it's the microfilming process.
Oh, thank goodness for technology now. What can we do to help you?
Well, I've already had some people offering to help me transcribe them. I do need help with that. I need help. In order to read the diaries, I need a microfilm reader printer. So we've been applying for grants and that sort of thing to see if we can purchase one of those. If I don't have one of those, I can't read the film.
Of course not.
But I have every confidence.
What kind of
we'll
price
find one.
for one of these?
Well, the one that I'm looking at, a brand new one, would be about $5,000.
So that is a considerable, but if 10 people or 100 people all went together, that wouldn't be so difficult.
Right.
Well, you know, I'd like to be one of those 100 people that helps you out. What else? What's your facility like? When's it open? How can we find you?
Talent Historical Society is located on Main Street in downtown Talent in the old community center. We are open in the afternoons from 1 to 5.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I just invite all of our viewers who have talent history or the talent to hunt for talent history to get in touch, because this is wonderful. Our history is being recaptured right now. I'm Bernie Martin Beck saying thanks for tuning in. Thank you so much.
Thank you.